to actually winning a championship rather than being mediocre. That's what rebuilding means. Now, are the Seahawks doing it or not? That's a different question. But it drives me nuts that this is considered to be a dirty word. I just don't see it that way.
So in 1999, when I was drafted to the Seattle Seahawks, this is interesting. I hadn't thought about this in this kind of purview. When I was drafted in 99, it was to a team, Dennis Erickson. It had basically 8-8, 7-9, 9-7, year after year after year, and Warren Moon and John Kitna and John Freeze, some different quarterbacks. There was, Cortez, kind of at the tail end of his career in 99 by the time I got there. But, man, there were a bunch of these veterans. House Ballard was there. Sam Adams was there. Cortez Kennedy was there. Ricky Waters was there, right? There were Pete Kendall, some really good players, Salk, but a very veteran team that Mike Holmgren had inherited. And, we were part of his first draft class, and I've told the stories about the combine and everything that he did, wanted to see where everybody was at physically. And it was a team that, ended up 9-7, ended up actually winning miraculously,
right.
even while losing 5 of 6 at the end of the year. I mean, we were 8-2. We were 8-2 that year with these veterans. And then Joey Galloway came back after a holdout, and it was just kind of disrupted the apple cart, all this stuff, right? So that was a team in 97, go 9-7, lose first round of the playoffs. And now it's like, okay, 2000 comes, and that was as clear a day a rebuild. I don't know if it was written about that. I don't know if there were headlines, but so many of those veterans moved on. Cut, we're starting over, right? And we're going to bring in some really cheap old veteran guys. George Kuntz, bless his heart, on the very end of his career, and just some moves, and try to infuse like Chad Brown, a high-priced free agent, but it was a topsy-turvy year, and there is no question that it turned from a very veteran team that was kind of that 500 to, well, we got to reboot. And we went 6-10. The only team I ever lost on. The only team in all my life, basketball, baseball, ever part of a real losing team. And then Hasselbeck gets traded for the next year, and the things kind of get going. Does this feel like a team that is in between like that? Does this feel like to you that this is a roster, this is a team, and what complicates it, and why I would challenge a whole quote-unquote rebuild, reboot, whatever, is because John and the personnel department and all of that structure of 15 years is here. That foundation is here. They didn't tear it all down. They didn't clean house. They didn't wipe it all out. As Jody even said in that press release, that the culture is here, right? And so many pieces are here, and that's why I don't know if I feel good about just accepting that, yep, this is just a rebuild year.
The messages are mixed. The messages are definitely mixed, and that's what's maybe making this a little bit hard to hear. The messages are mixed. On one hand, and a couple of weeks ago, you trade for Ernest Jones. That's a going for it move. That's not a rebuilding move, right? That's a guy who's coming up at the end of his contract or at the end of his rookie deal and is about to get paid. That's the kind of move you make for going for it.
Impact.
Cutting Dodson for Knight, that's a rebuilding move, right? I mean, the move you made yesterday, that's the type of move that rebuilding teams make. You cut a guy who's a veteran, who's starting for you, who's, maybe not the best player in the world, but he's your leading tackler. And banking on a fourth-round rookie means more like determining whether or not that fourth-round rookie's any good. I think if you were to ask John Schneider, if he were sitting in the chair next to us, he would say, look, it's not about rebuilding or going forward. It's just about acquiring talent and trying to get marginally better at key spots. And that's fair. I mean, I wouldn't disagree with him. I understand what he'd be saying, but those messages are a little bit split. And so you use the phrase in between. It does feel a little bit in between. It does feel a little like, are you rebuilding or are you not? Are you committed to building around something new or not? And I do think that there are a bunch of veterans on this team that don't necessarily need to be here. I think there are some guys that you can move on from in a real big hurry that are not part of the vision that Mike McDonald wants, right? Not just at linebacker. I could think of at least a tight end and some other folks that just don't seem to, maybe a cornerback, that just don't really seem to fit the vision. And maybe we'll learn all that, and the next offseason will sort of be about, much more customizing this team to his liking.
Yeah, because this team, by the way, via the scheme, demands more. This scheme, right, and you see this in college football. Salk back in the day, Florida State, Bobby Bowden, ran two-man. Like Mickey Andrews, esteemed defensive coordinator. You know what? They didn't have to have like really high football IQ guys. That's not a rip on any of those guys from that generation. Like, no, man, this is what we play. Play man, play two man. Like that's it. Like there's no thinking. It is just balling, and you are so gifted that I don't need you to think about switching coverages and switching techniques and leverages and understanding all these different zones.
This does.
This does. And especially at that linebacker and safety position. This requires a high level of football IQ and football acumen. Offensively, there's a lot going on. A lot of checks. This is not just a position certainly close to the football that you can just at guard and center, like, oh, yeah, just slide protection all game. Oh, we're just in this air raid and I'm in a kick step protection. Like, no, actually, there's a lot of protections. There's a lot of run game. There's a lot of movement. There's a lot of check with me's. There's a lot of stuff that you got to be on point for. So maybe this will be just a natural transition to your point of, hey, man, you were fit in the old system, but this is not going to be a fit in this system, right? Both schematically and maybe even, I don't know, culturally with the things that Mike McDonald demands and find a little bit more important than maybe Pete did in the structure of his culture.
I think there's a lot of validity to all of that, which is why none of this should be panic time or anything like that. It's also worth noting that, his feeling is, and just going back to what Menifee said yesterday, pretty smart guy, if you have a new coach, you're probably rebuilding. Mm-hmm. And,
Tennessee feels that way.
It does. But does Los Angeles with the Chargers? Does Washington right now with Dan Quinn? I mean, I don't know whether they would say it the same way.
Is that different with guys that had been in this league a long time, that have been head coaches, that had taken teams
He didn't
Super
say
Bowls?
He didn't say with first-time head coaches. He said with new head coaches. Mm-hmm. So I don't think that's what he was saying. Maybe you're right. Maybe that's part of it. But
it does feel differently amongst the teams with new first-time young head coaches. Right, and you're right. I don't think he would say that. I think he would say very clearly, no, it's a rebuild, right? Like Jim Harbaugh was come in there for all that he brings to that to totally rebuild and rebrand and almost redesign a Chargers team that had been soft.
He did, but they're winning.
They are.
They absolutely. If that's your definition, yes, they've rebuilt. They've rebuilt.
Mm-hmm.
They're 9 games into it.
Yes.
And they already have a brand new identity and everything else because he was steadfast about it.
Yep.
Yeah, that is why the in-between thing to me is always challenging. Yep. And what makes someone like Jim Harbaugh as good at his job as he is, there is no in-between.
Okay, so do you
think
do you think it would be different? And how different would it be if Jim Harbaugh, I asked Brady the other day, okay, if Sam Howell were the quarterback all season long, what would the Seahawks record be? He thought 1-8.
No, really?
Yes.
I don't know about that.
1-8, 2-7, maybe. The difference that Geno's made. Jim Harbaugh were here. If Jim Harbaugh were here, if his young D coordinator is getting a lot of love and attention is here, if the offense is like, do you think Jim Harbaugh's plan, his blueprint, his style, you had the personnel here to be 6-3?
No, not necessarily, but you would have done things differently in terms of what you were trying to bring in order to fit what he wanted. So,
yeah,
I mean, I can't answer that because I don't know what the team would look like. I know that the Seahawks are better than the Chargers last year, and the Chargers are better than the Seahawks right now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's all I know. I mean, that's as far as I could, sort of prove to you just by looking at numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think having a slavish devotion to what it is you want to accomplish, knowing what it... Look, I say the same thing every freaking day. This is not news. Have an identity and go about trying to achieve it.